All right, hey everybody. Good to see you. While they're miking up our panelists and they're making their way out, I'll just share a couple remarks and introduce them as they come out. First, let me introduce myself. I am Doug Lewin. As you can see, oh, I'm on that side, there we are. So I do a couple different things. I'm a consultant, mostly working on energy transition issues. I'm a writer of the Texas Energy and Power newsletter. That's on Substack. You can find it at douglewin.com. I also have a podcast, which is also there. It's called the Energy Capital Podcast, also at douglewin.com. And one of the things I'm adding to my repertoire, because apparently I'm not busy enough, is I'm going to be teaching here at UT in the fall. So if you are a graduate student and are interested in a class called Policymaking and the Energy Transition, I've spent most of my career working on policy related to energy transition issues. So you can look for that. It's already listed, and apparently folks can sign up for it already. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about ERCOT, grid resilience, and distributed energy. We're going to have three panelists come out. I'll wait till they're out here to introduce them, but let me just share a thought or two in advance of this. So as has been talked about a few times today, I think when you talk about the electric grid in Texas, you talk about the ERCOT grid. Winter Storm Uri was very much kind of this, almost like the pandemic is for life in general. It's like a before and after, right? It's like, oh, pre-pandemic. It's on the grid, Winter Storm Uri is kind of like that. And there is this very big emphasis right now, understandably and rightfully so, on reliability and on resilience on the grid. But what we're going to be talking about today with distributed energy is really kind of unique, because I would represent to you there are sort of multiple problems that we need to solve, and we can't solve for just one of them. As if reliability wasn't a big enough challenge, we also have to meet the challenges of affordability, right? You can't have a reliable grid at any cost, right? You have to have a reliable grid that people can afford. And we know from US Census data that 45% of Texans in the year 2022 had to choose between food, medicine, and paying their power bill. I'm going to say that again. 45% of Texas households chose between food, medicine, and energy. So lowering energy costs is an absolute necessity. And then if that wasn't enough, to add to reliability and affordability, we've got to deal with sustainability, right? We have to have a sustainable grid. We've got to meet the challenge not only of climate change, but just of really poor air quality. And we have now, it's always been Houston and Dallas for 20 plus years that have been out of attainment with air quality standards, but now you can add into that Austin, San Antonio, Laredo with the new PM 2.5 standards, and we know PM 2.5 causes major problems. So what we're talking about today, distributed energy resources, and our panel is going to talk about what that means, what's included in that definition, how much of them we have. It checks each of those boxes. It makes the grid more reliable by adding supply or reducing demand, which is equally valuable. It increases resiliency because the power sources are closer to where people need it, and things like transmission outages or big generation outages, the generation and gas supply outages of Winter Storm Uri, right? You've got the power sources closer to you. It meets that affordability challenge because it lowers people's bills, and it's a sustainable solution, particularly when you're talking about solar storage, energy efficiency, and things like that. So I think everybody's mic'd up. Let me bring out the panel, and I'm gonna join you guys over here as I introduce, I guess I need to flip on the mic that's in my pocket here. I'm loud though, so I'll just keep talking. Okay, here we go. All right, so I'm really pleased to have with me today on this panel, we've got to my left, Bill Barnes. Bill is Senior Director of Regulatory Affairs at NRG Energy. For those that don't know NRG, they are one of the biggest power companies in the state of Texas. They operate in other states as well, but they own both generation and retail. So if you've heard of the brands Reliant and Green Mountain, I could go on. There's a long list of brands under NRG's banner. Bill has had an amazing career, one of the smartest guys I know on all things power, has worked at Goldman Sachs, ERCOT, Accenture, like I said, 20 years experience in the industry. He's gonna go first, but before he goes, I'm gonna introduce the rest of our panel. To his left, to your right, is Tiffany Wu. I'm just going to say this about each of these three. They're each three of the smartest people I know in this space, which is why I asked them to join me here today. I wouldn't have otherwise. She's a senior project manager at the Texas Energy Poverty Research Institute. So what I was just talking about is this problem with affordability. She's very focused on that and making sure that distributed energy resources are not just playthings for the rich, but are available to all. She also has a great background. She was formerly aide to Commissioner McAdams at the Public Utility Commission. He really led the effort to establish an aggregated distributed energy resource task force and get a pilot started. She was very much in the mix on that and really a driving force behind it, so she's got a great perspective. She also has had a varied career before that, working for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, right, on like carbon capture, so Tiffany's kind of amazing. Thanks for being with us, Tiffany. And then last but definitely not least, John Padalino. He is the General Counsel and Chief Administrative Officer at Bandera Co-op. He's going to tell you about Bandera, so I won't go into the stats on Bandera, but he is on that aggregated distributed energy resource task force I was just talking about. He worked for 6 years at USDA, and for the last 2 or 3 or so years of that was the administrator of the Rural Utility Service. So has a really, not only a perspective from Bandera locally, but also a much broader perspective on co-ops and their role in all of this. So with that long introduction, I'm going to stop and turn it over to Bill to share some thoughts. And each of them are going to speak for a few minutes. I'm going to ask a few questions, then we'll take questions from you all through Slido.
All right, well, thank you. Can everyone hear me? Okay, just making sure, mic check. All right, sounds good. Appreciate the very generous introduction. If we can go to the first slide. So my role here, one is I'm going to talk about the basics. When we talk about DERs or distributed generation, what do we mean? And where do we stand currently in terms of growth of DERs? And so just basics. DERs, distributed energy resources, which is used synonymously a lot of the times with distributed generation, are essentially, what makes it so exciting is these are customers that are participating in the power market, right? That's the big difference. When you think about how electricity is generated, first things we typically think about is one like large central power station, either a big gas plant or coal or nuke. Distributed energy resources are where customers participate with a certain type of technology. And we're seeing significant growth in certain types of technologies themselves. In terms of the types of DERs and distributed generation, which we currently sit in the ERCOT market with around 4,394 megawatts of installed capacity of DERs, DG. So the first type, which these...
Bill, can we just quickly put,
yeah.
I want to put that in perspective for folks. So if I've got this right, I think Austin Energy's peak load is about 3,500 megawatts. So the entire city of Austin, Austin Energy's whole service territory, about 3,500. So we've got a little bit more than an Austin worth of DG in ERCOT.
Yes.
Okay, and that's just DG. That's just, well, you're going to describe what that is.
Yes.
Okay.
So the different categories or buckets of DG. The first is distributed generation resource, or DGR. This is a type of DER or DG that has volunteered to be modeled in ERCOT's system and dispatched in the wholesale market. So this means you're a pretty sophisticated customer at that point. You are fully modeled, you are dispatched in real time, you get instructions from ERCOT, and you can participate in ERCOT's ancillary service market to generate additional revenue and provide additional grid reliability services. We have about 827 megawatts of DGR. DGR is the newest category, and it's one that we're seeing probably the most growth in at the moment in terms of battery storage. So if you look at the types of technologies of DGR, 272 megawatts of solar, 600 megawatts of batteries. Well, why are batteries attracted to the DGR type? Because batteries like to sell ancillary services. They can make additional revenue. The quick response from battery systems provides an excellent frequency response service to the grid when there are disturbances on the power system, when we have a lightning storm, or when it's really cold or really hot out, or a power plant trips offline. We need these resources to be able to turn on and manage the disturbance and frequency when those events occur. Batteries are excellent at doing that. The second category, which is called settlement only, these resources have said, ERCOT, we don't want to participate in your wholesale market. We're mainly going to offset load, but we can export additional megawatts to the grid. That is the chart on the top right. That is the dark blue. So you'll see pretty significant growth. We're about a little over 1,000 megawatts on settlement only. This is the oldest category. This began with backup diesel generation about 20 years ago. Those were the first types of DG resources in the ERCOT system as settlement only. So ERCOT will pay them for their exports of energy, but that's it. They're not modeled, they're not dispatchable, they don't get ancillary service revenues. And there you see the diesels at 291, solar 283, no batteries. Why no batteries? No ancillary service revenue, no ancillary service participation. Natural gas has been the trend recently with 400 megawatts. Why are we seeing natural gas? DG, HEB, Walmart, resiliency. So backup power as a result of Winter Storm Uri and grid outages. So just adding resiliency to the system. And by far the largest category is what's called unregistered DG. And that is the bottom left chart. Those are the small guys. Those are below 1 megawatt. That's your rooftop solar. And you can see that growth is significant. So rooftop solar has grown for a few primary reasons. One, panel costs are coming down somewhat. Two is you're seeing pretty generous incentives to install rooftop solar at your homes. Encore has a pretty generous incentive, but I'm sure if anyone has had solar installers coming by, knocking on your door, asking to put panels on your roof, you're seeing a lot more attention and growth in that area, and we're over 2,400 megawatts of rooftop solar. So those three categories are the primary sources of DG, and then on the bottom right, that's kind of more of the technical descriptions that you can refer to in terms of size. The DGR and settlement-only DGs are typically between 1 megawatt and 10 megawatts. Unregistered is below 1 megawatt, and it shows you also the pricing points, whether you get a dispatch price or you get the price that you're charged for wholesale power at the load. So that's kind of the basics of what are DERs, what is DG, how much of it do we have right now, what are the trends in terms of what's growing.
So as he goes to the second slide, I just want to say, I appreciate this so much because it's so hard. Like, I work on this stuff all the time. I write about it. And until I saw the slide, I didn't know how much DG. So I hope you guys appreciate it. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Doug. And then, so this next topic is one that's really exciting and one that my fellow panelists know way more about than I do, so I look forward to hearing them talk about it. But I'm just teeing it up. This is what Doug mentioned, is there's a pilot to aggregate DERs together, particularly at the residential level. So this isn't, I wouldn't think of this as your large, maybe 9 megawatt backup gen that's used to provide resiliency for, say, like your HEBs. These are typically going to be like home battery systems. And why this is exciting and should be exciting to you all, this is when you guys can actually help participate in the grid at scale, right? My company, John's company, like this is where this is where the most of the untapped potential is in terms of providing environmentally friendly capacity to help serve the load and make sure our grid is resilient. So the ADER pilot that the commission, that Tiffany worked on, started out with aggregating together ADERs that can provide what's called non-spin, which is a certain type of ancillary service that ERCOT dispatches. So an ADER would be an aggregation of, say, hundreds, maybe thousands of customers that will look like a single generator in ERCOT's model. And so when ERCOT dispatches it, they'll send an instruction, and it's say NRG is the one managing the ADR. We'll get that dispatch instruction, and then we'll distribute that dispatch to all the different customers that are participating in that aggregation. And we can, depending on where the state of charge is for each of the battery systems, we can cycle through those customers, and we can there's a lot of intelligence that you can bake into the dispatch algorithm when you get to that level, which is why it's so exciting. We have about 9.4 megawatts ERCOT-wide at the moment that's in the registration process. Admittedly, the registration process is a bit tedious. John can attest to that. I can attest to that. Both Reliant and Bandera, we have submitted our what's called DOTA, which is a registration form, but we have not completed, ERCOT has not allowed us to complete the registration yet because of testing and making sure that they have the right information in their wholesale model. So this is one point that's really exciting that we want to point out to you guys, and I think you'll hear more about it from the other panelists. So, thanks.
It is very exciting, and it is, I think, like we see so much sort of tension in the energy transition between where the vision is and between how it actually works. On my podcast a couple weeks ago, I interviewed Pablo Vegas, and the first question I asked him was, he's the CEO of ERCOT, so obviously the grid manager for 90% of Texas, and I said, what's your vision for things in like 5 to 10 years? I wasn't sure exactly what he was going to say, but there's a lot, I would have thought with a lot of the sort of talk in the state, it would have been, we're going to build a lot of natural gas plants through the Texas Energy Fund or something like that. But he said, no, the thing he said was, I think we're going to see lots of little sources of power spread all over the grid, and we've got to figure out how to coordinate them. And you see there's 4,000 megawatts, but we're still at like 9 megawatts in the pilot. So taking that pilot and turning it into
a lot of room for growth.
A lot of room for growth. It's going to be really interesting. All right, and so we want to make sure that as that growth is happening, that this is something that the benefits are available to the widest possible group. So appreciate Tiffany being with us, and take it away, Tiffany.
Yeah, thanks. And I do want to point out one thing about what Bill has talked about. In the past, some of these facilities that have been for backup generation are buried deep within the distribution system. And ERCOT only manages the transmission system, so they were kind of uncomfortable for a long time about allowing these distributed energy resources to participate in the ancillary services market. So that's why the ADR program has to start as a pilot program so that everybody can learn from it, and why it's so tedious right now with the registration, because people historically have been, or are uncomfortable with trying new things. And these are very small systems, and there are a lot of them. So we're working out the kinks. But now I'm at TEPRI, and I am the senior project manager for our VPP program. And I have this slide up, and I really want to point out a few things with this slide. I know it is a little bit dense, but I want to point out two of the programs that we work on as TEPRI in the resiliency space. And then I also want to point out the different ways that people define resiliency. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is this Community Voices and Energy Survey. TEPRI conducted a survey in 2023, and we received 6,520 responses from the low and moderate income community in Texas. And we were looking for understanding their behaviors, their perceptions around energy, specifically as it relates to affordability, reliability, resiliency, and sustainability. We already have 13 regional reports on the website, so I have the website up there. Please go check them out. They've been really helpful for me as I'm thinking through the VPP program. And then we also have the final statewide report that's going to be published next Wednesday by my colleague Bobici, who is here, and her email is also on the slide. So if you're interested in reading those slides, checking it out, asking questions, feel free to reach out to her. So one of the points that I pulled out from our final report is that we asked the participants to prioritize affordability, reliability, resiliency, and sustainability. And I don't think that it's surprising that the top priority for most people was affordability. But what was interesting is that the second highest priority was resiliency, followed by sustainability, and then lastly, reliability. And the way that we define these terms was for reliability is receiving enough electricity to meet daily needs and avoid an outage, versus resiliency is electricity is reliable during storms and quickly comes back online after a major outage. I think in the last few years, people have been really concerned with weather, and so resiliency is really top of mind for a lot of people. The other program, which is the program that I'm running, is the Virtual Power Plant Pilot Program. I love pilot programs, apparently. What we're trying to do is install solar and battery systems on churches and apartment complexes that are interested in becoming resiliency hubs for their communities. And what I learned recently is that the definition for resilience hubs, though, doesn't specifically call out energy. And there's this definition here. A resilience hub are facilities that support residents and coordinate resource distribution and services before, during, or after a natural hazard event. And this definition is important because there's a lot of federal funding coming down to support disadvantaged communities. And they have this resilience hub aspect to it, but that doesn't necessarily mean like backup power during an outage versus from TEPRI's viewpoint, we do see backup power as a part of the resilience story. So the programs that I'm trying to run are for churches and apartments in Houston and Galveston. The size is a little bit bigger than the residential systems, which are usually around 5 to 10 kilowatts. These ones are going to be 100 to 250 kilowatts, and we're working with different organizations. I'm hoping for 15 to 20 facilities seem interested. We'll see how many of those get funded. And I have this other point here. Why now? What's interesting is that, batteries in Texas have not been very lucrative, so most people don't put them on their houses. Usually you use solar. We don't have net metering in Texas, so the benefit for solar is pretty limited. And most solar installers don't understand the benefit of batteries. But there's a lot of work in Texas. First of all, the ADER, which is providing a new revenue source for people who have batteries or controllable thermostats as well, to provide a service to the ERCOT wholesale market. And then they will get revenues back for it, which is not something that's existed previously. There's also the Texas Backup Power Promise Package, which is a pot of money that the state government is giving to provide backup power to critical facilities. And then another thing that the PUC passed last year was utilities are allowed to submit resiliency plans. And here there's another definition for what a resiliency event is, and it involves extreme weather conditions, wildfires, cybersecurity threats, or physical security threats that pose as a material risk to the safe and reliable operation of an electric utility's transmission and distribution system. So in this case, the definition is specifically focused on like the transmission and distribution assets, which are the poles and wires, and it's to be seen whether or not the utilities will allow the use of customers' distributed energy resources to participate. The other thing that's happening this year is there's tons of federal incentives coming our way. There's also Justice 40, which requires a lot of these programs to distribute 40% of the economic benefits from the programs to disadvantaged communities. So a lot of nonprofits, cities, counties, states are trying to figure out how do we use all of this money. The other end, we also have nonprofits weren't able to monetize the IRS tax credits in the past, but they are allowing direct pay for nonprofits, which means that you no longer have to pay taxes. They'll just give you a check at the end. So, yeah.
No, it's not at the end, though. They give it to you, at the end of the construction. So, if you spend,
sorry.
Right?
It's it's basically you file your taxes, and then whenever you get your return.
Right. But if you're a nonprofit, my understanding, or local government, once you complete that, it's $1 million project for solar, you get a $300,000 check.
But there is a delay to it.
There's a little delay. Okay, cool. Great information. Appreciate it, Tiffany. I'm sure y'all are already thinking of questions and putting them in on Slido. We'll now go to John to talk through Bandera's truly innovative and exciting ADER work.
All right, thank you, Doug, and thank you, Bill. Thank you, Tiffany, and greetings to be here. I was thinking when Tiffany was talking that the definition of resiliency, I think, is rural Texas. Less than 100 years ago, I just drove in this morning from Bernie. That area didn't have electricity, and it was rural people who came together and built their own electric co-ops so that they could have electricity. And that's the story across rural Texas and rural America. It was brought to us by the agency where I work, the Rural Utility Service, which used to be the Rural Electrification Administration. And so I think, when you think about Tiffany's definition of resiliency, it's people getting out and really, stringing wires on poles and putting poles in the ground. That's the definition of resiliency. And these folks did it in the midst of the Great Depression. We're seeing a war break out all over the world, and rural people decided to take on millions of dollars of loans, not grants, and built their own electric system. So if you want to go to the next slide, a little bit about Bandera Electric. Our story in this context starts about 10 years ago when we asked our members, what do you want? Novel idea to ask customers, members who own you, what do you want? And they said, we want high-speed broadband, we want renewable energy options, and we want options to finance renewable energy. And kind of since then, we've embarked on turning our electric co-op into an integrated utility, which provides today, we serve over 13,000 members with high-speed broadband, and it's better than anything that you have available in Austin. It's fiber all the way to the router, not just to the home, but into the router. So there's no Ethernet, it's fiber all the way, and we're offering up to 2 gigs to our members, and we have over 1,800 miles of fiber optic network. That's important in this context because if we ever want to really run those close to 4,000 megawatts of solar, we need communications. And relying on customer Wi-Fi is not going to get it done. We're going to need a real utility scale telecommunications network that's connected to all those devices out there. We became an electrical contractor in 2017. We're one of the first certified Tesla Powerwall installers. Might be the only nice thing I'll say about Tesla. But we started selling to our members solar and storage systems. And we have almost 600 members who now have, or I guess 700 members who now have some form of DER. Everybody has solar, and about 1 out of 2 solar systems have also purchased energy storage. And so as we engaged in that conversation, and if you remember Bill's hockey stick, right about when this hockey stick really started taking off was 2017. And our members were, being approached by third-party solar installers, and they're told, and you probably have heard the sales pitch, you won't have an electric bill. Tiffany said, there's not net metering in Texas, but the solar installers will tell you there's net metering. And so at Bandera Electric, we pay avoided wholesale power cost. And our members didn't understand, really. First, they didn't understand that it's not a very good investment if your home's not energy efficient. You're just going to blow that electricity right out the window. 2, they didn't understand that, if in a very, beginning kind of industry, the technology wasn't all that great. It wasn't all that efficient. Systems failed. And then they didn't understand that their home, the load behind the meter, consumed all that electricity before it ever would be exported to the grid. And so if you go to the next slide, we started building a system that really could talk about what the solar and storage was doing in real time, how that was serving the load behind the meter, and then if there was anything left over, what was exported to the grid. And we started thinking about it, okay, well, these are just circuits behind the home, and we can measure things like HVAC, we can measure the water heater. In rural areas, most people have a water well. Anything that moves water consumes a lot of electricity, and no electric provider really is transparent. Southwest has transparency. Electric providers don't have transparency. You can go on Reliance website, you can go on Bandera Electric, but when you're actually running your washing machine or dryer, you have no idea how much that's costing you. When you fill up your tank of gas to the 00 whatever, how much that's costing you per gallon. And the comparison is the not comparison is in gasoline, we tell everybody what you're paying. I drive past one gas station after another. We probably all do, right? And we know, okay, because right over here at the 7-Eleven, it was like $3.19, but at the HEB in Dripping Springs, it's like $2.89 right now. And I know that because they told me that. But electric providers don't tell anyone what they're using. So we built a platform called the Polloware. And if you go to the next slide, this is just a small screenshot of what we do, but it's important for DER and grid resiliency at the ERCOT level because we built it. We didn't buy this. And when I mean we built it, we're a distribution service provider. So we think like a utility because we are a utility. And so we built it to have aggregated appliance level data that we can sort by substation, by transformer, by feeder, by phase A, phase B, phase C, all the way down to the premise level. So, this is one site that you can see, and it shows the storage, the solar, how much it's producing by dollars or by energy in real time. And it can show the HVAC, how much it's costing you right now to run your HVAC. ERCOT sent out 100 million energy alerts last summer, I'm exaggerating. And how many people did anything? Right, no one did anything. 2 people, sorry.
Thank you for your service.
That's right. And it's because we had no idea what it costs. Like, well, would I save money? Would I, and that's really what it comes down to. The last panel was kind of talking about money. We need these things because it ultimately comes down to how much does it cost me? And at a utility level, we can now see how much HVAC costs on all those different aggregations. And we've been talking with Pablo, with JP, with Venkat, with the folks at ERCOT, that, hey, we could provide this to you at a substation level. So you can see it at the transmission level, and you could put this all over Texas because that 4,000 megawatts on the eclipse, what's gonna happen? It's only gonna be 4 minutes, but a thunderstorm in Dallas can go for 2 hours and it still be 108. And when that resource drops, ERCOT has no idea what's happening. And so one thing we learned by having appliance level data, and up here I was trying to be polite and put peak events, but I guess I could just say extreme weather. This is what happened in Uri, and you can download these slides. The hash marks is basically February 14th. So, the Tuesday before, it got cold. And by that Friday, electric providers were in emergency operation mode. By Sunday, we're having hourly meetings. By Sunday night, we provide, our QSC, our wholesale power provider is LCRA. They're telling us, not looking good. We might lose the grid. And of course, rolling outages started. And the HVAC was off the roof. But look at the 2 bottom slides. That's water. That's pool pumps because they go into freeze mode and they just run. And when I showed this to Pablo, he knows this. I mean, he's a super smart guy. But when you see it, when you see what happens and that no one has any control over that. And then, I'm showing water wells here. So that's what impacts us in rural areas. But in Austin, I have a home here in Austin. We were out of water 6-7 days, and it's because of leaks, and then the pumps just kept running. And so that was driving load, and that was, what was impacting the grid. And so while we didn't have the resources to keep up with it, it was just spiking through the roof. So having the platform and this knowledge, we built an on-bill financing tariff-based program. So we changed our tariff so our members can finance a Polloware, get energy efficiency information in real time, a smart thermostat, all those energy improvements, new HVAC insulation. Really, if we just insulated all of Texas, we wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't need to have this discussion. And we finance all that on the bill, and then we finance solar and storage. And so as we built that program, and Tiffany and the Utility Commission put out that request to be on the ADR task force, we said, hey, we should be on there. We have a platform, and we have all these resources now that are in the platform, and we can really control it. So like Bill said, we're building our virtual power plant program. And what we're doing differently, and Tiffany mentioned it, because we're a nonprofit, we're a 501c12, so we can take that IRA cash in lieu of the credit, And so we decided to own our own batteries, where we're allowing our members to subscribe to a resiliency service. So the battery will kick on if the grid goes down. We're pairing it up with solar, and we'll use it the rest of the time for grid services. And so we've registered, what we have enrolled so far. With ERCOT, we're, I think, at step 6 of a simple 14-step process. We're now, putting it into their platform, Rio, and then we'll be testing and modeling probably at the end of May, early June. And all the while, we're working with Enphase, who are working with as the battery supplier, to build that control into our platform. So having communications, having the platform, and having a program is really helping us provide these resources to our members, and many are LMI.
So is that the last of the
Yes.
slides? So I want to just say 2 things before we open it up to questions, and I'll ask the panelists if you want to respond to each other before we open up to questions too. How many folks live here in Austin, have Austin Energy? And keep your hands up. How many people have other co-ops or other municipal providers? Okay. So I hope it wasn't lost on you. Any vertically integrated utility, part of the reason we constructed this panel this way was I wanted Bill to speak to kind of some of and be able to speak some of those competitive market issues, right? Because they are serving Houston, Dallas, Laredo, Corpus Christi, those areas that are under competition. But we have 78, 76 something co-ops in the state of Texas, and a bunch of municipal utilities that are vertically integrated in the sense that they can provide generation, they provide retail, there are poles and wires. So this is important in and of itself for Bandera service territory, but I hope you see the bigger picture that anybody else could do this kind of thing or any different kind of flavor around that. The only other point I wanted to make, and I want to see if the panel wants to respond to this too, this is an amazing, I'm going to use this, I'll give you credit, but this is incredible, right? Because a lot of what I hear when I talk about demand response is you want to turn down my thermostat. No, it's voluntary. If you want to be paid to have your thermostat turned down, you can sign up. And if you don't, that's what markets are for. You can pay. The prices might be higher because that's what's going on in the market. But even if you just take HVAC out of it, how many pools are there in the state of Texas, right? There is flexible demand all over the place out there. And we're just getting started because the ultimate flexible demand, electric vehicles, are just starting to also come up that hockey stick curve, right? And does anybody in here care when their car gets charged? No, you just want that full battery when you get in the car. I was gonna say step on the gas. No, you don't step on the gas. What do you step on? The accelerator, right? You wanna make sure you've got a full battery, right? So this is the evolution of the system, is demand being responsive and flexible. Would y'all like to say anything else, either in response to each other, anything before I open it up to questions?
Well,
yes.
Similar to a lot of what John said, we're trying to solve the same problems from a slightly more challenging perspective, is because we don't have the full integrated system. We don't have control of the distribution system. We work with our distribution and transmission partners, CenterPoint, Encore, AEP. But very similar in what you see in the chart is, right, the key to unlocking the growth of this technology is y'all. We want to know how to get you engaged so that you want to participate. That's typically financial incentives. You're going to hear this a lot. You probably already are. Interoperability. Mm-hmm. So each DSP has a different standard. You're lucky you're your own DSP, so you set your own standard.
That's so distribution service providers. So Encore, CenterPoint, they have different.
So if we want to interconnect a battery system in Houston, and we want to aggregate that together to work together with one in Corpus Christi, we're going to have a different set of rules because AEP and CenterPoint are probably going to have different interconnection requirements, different forms to fill out, blah, blah, blah. And then the other thing that John might have alluded to, Tesla, this may be related, is we want the battery technologies to work together as well. Because some customers are going to want power walls. Some customers are going to want Enphase. We primarily use Enphase. And Enphase has been really nice to work with as opposed to someone else. So we want to be able to have customers that have different battery technologies that can work together as one single ADER VPP. So there's technical challenges to get to that point. We're not there yet. But in terms of unlocking the growth in the competitive market, it's financial incentives, allowing these VPPs to provide ERCOT the grid services they need and that they pay for, instead of just your gas plant and your coal plant. We want to be able to have access to all the ancillary service revenues. ECRS is, I think, going to be in the next phase of the ADR pilot. And then obviously, you guys are aware when the grid gets tight, the energy prices go very high. So that's the other kind of piece to the puzzle.
And this is really interesting that people this is a big motivator, right? This is a fascinating survey, and the affordability is really high up there. Okay, Dave, what do we got?
Okay, so we have a question. How do co-ops measure the benefit of home solar to their service area and to the greater ERCOT grid? Is it only through individualized value of solar studies?
The way we value it, and I can't speak for all co-ops, maybe they should all follow us, but really the way we value it as far as a monetary value is by looking how much it allows us to shave the peak during a 4CP event. And so when we can quantify that because we have the data. And so,
John, you want to describe what 4CP is?
So 4CP, the 4 coincidental peaks, which kind of sets the market, sets the price. The way our contract works with LCRA, they set kind of the ratio load share of all the different people purchasing power from them by what was your load during that 4CP period. So it's June, July, August, and September, and it's just 15 minutes in each of those months, and it's the peak period in each of those months. So I think like September 6th last year was a peak time, and that was the time they set the 4CP. That was the peak in ERCOT. And so
That's the cost to allocate for transmission costs.
that's right.
So that is how transmission costs are allocated both to big customers, so anybody over like 700 kW, a really, really big box store, but also manufacturers, but also the co-ops and munis appear to ERCOT as sort of one meter, like one really large customer. So their transmission charges for a whole year are set by how much they're using during 4 15-minute increments. So if solar is reducing the use, they're saving a lot of money, not just for that customer with solar, but for everybody.
All the members. And then, and we use that amount in addition to the revenue we make by selling those systems to really justify the program. And that's really how we value it as a utility service. Because, you'll hear a lot about we don't want to subsidize one to the other. And that argument doesn't really make sense to me because, we put a pole in Lakey, Texas, and the people in Bernie, Texas aren't really benefiting from that pole, but everybody pays for it. Same with the transmission system. And solar in one part of our service area by reducing our load during those peak events helps all the members. And then we can spread that monetization across the board.
Great question.
Another question. What about standardization or APIs for these different components? Or do you think we'll see, here's a Tesla solution, here's an Enphase solution, here's a Generac solution, and they'll play on their own with their own ecosystems behind the meter? Or do you think we'll eventually see where you can mix and match to try to reduce the cost?
Who wants to take that one?
So we did see, and I can't remember the name of it, Tesla has released a public API where you can get access to some functionality in the Powerwall, which is like a baby step forward. I hope that it's not vendor specific. It would be nice, again, to get to like an interoperability standard where everyone speaks the same language in terms of accessing data, so that if there are dispatch instructions, how you talk to the devices are all kind of common. That's obviously going to help expand the programs.
It may take a long time, but it will happen. It's necessary. I mean, just imagine if, like, instead of the standard plug on the wall you plug something into, if, like, everybody that made an appliance had a different plug and you had to go and get an adapter for everything you plug into your wall. Like, if you've been to Europe and you got to go get the adapter before you... Imagine if in the U.S. you had to think about that. Yeah. Right? And the reason that we do have one standard plug is because the electric industry got together, 100 years ago, 80 years ago, it was like, we need to standardize this, but we're never going to sell stuff.
Yeah, and there are a lot of efforts to standardize. There's the IEEE. We talk a lot. We talked a lot and still talk a lot about standardization, interoperability, open access to APIs. And at the commission, they were working, and I hope that they are still working, on a distributed energy resource interconnection rule that was going to include some sort of interoperability standard, but that's kind of a slow process. Something else that I've been thinking about as I'm working on these VPP pilot programs is when we're putting out RFPs for solar and battery systems, can we require some of the interoperability standards? Because a lot of that is it's a business question more so than a policy question.
I think we're 2 minutes over. I'd like to sneak one more question in, even though we have a few more. Why are utilities in Texas opposed to integrating and interconnecting DERs?
Why are utilities in Texas opposed to? It's kind of a broad brush there. There's one utility that is very for it. maybe why are some other utility? Why is there opposition sometimes from utilities to DERs?
I think it goes a little bit to that interoperability. So part of like the IEEE standards is a concept about just having knowledge, right? And so utilities right now, like if I'm running CenterPoint down in Houston, I have no visibility of what's happening, you know, at any device, any aggregation of devices. There's a goal in the ADER to have density on a feeder so we can learn from it. And I always ask, without any visibility, what are we going to learn? And without any way to control it, what are we going to do? And so I think it kind of ties a little bit with that interoperability argument, because if you're operating the grid and you see a problem, well, you want to take an action. And to be able to take that action, you need control. And before you do that, you need to have visibility. So I think that's part of it.
Any other ideas on that one?
I mean, it's dangerous for me to speak for Encore CenterPoint, so don't quote me. Looking at someone particular in the front. I think what they would say, and I've heard this before, is that the distribution system was never engineered for power to flow backwards up into the transmission system, right? It was designed to serve customers. And so this is a new thing that's happening, right? It's the flows, how the demand looks is just different, and it needs to be studied. I think they would say, we're good with it. We just give us time to figure out what the impacts are going to be so that we can have a resilient, reliable distribution system that can handle it. That would be mine.
Yeah, I got to think, and I won't ask any of you to say yes or no unless you want to, but I do think that lost revenues is part of the picture too, right? I mean, it's less sales if somebody's generating power on top of their roof. It's less going to the utility. Of course, there's ways to deal with that and sell different kinds of services. I know NRG is getting into that with the
that's 100% true. Yeah. I mean, that's why we've built programs to offset those lost kilowatt hour sales with subscription revenue.
Yeah. So I know we're over time. We could talk a lot more about this. If I leave you with anything, though, this is a really exciting space. It's very dynamic. As you can tell, there's challenges that's changing. But I really do think, again, when you look at each of those challenges, reliability, resiliency, affordability, sustainability, this one is one of the few solutions that really tags each one of those. So please join me in thanking the panel. Great job.
Thank you.